The results came back on a Tuesday morning while I was eating breakfast. I had my phone propped against my coffee mug, scrolling through emails, not really paying attention, when the notification popped up. Your ancestry DNA results are ready. I put down my fork, I opened the app, and I read the results 3 times before I accepted that I was reading them correctly. My mother was not my biological mother. My father was not my biological father. I was not who I had been told I was for 34 years. I sat at that kitchen table for a long time. My coffee went cold, the eggs I had made went cold. Outside, a neighbor was mowing his lawn. Somewhere down the street, a dog was barking at something. The world was completely ordinary in every direction, and I was sitting in the middle of it holding a phone that had just rearranged everything I understood about myself. My name is Naomi Grace Ellison, or at least that is the name I was given. And what I am about to tell you is the story of a Tuesday morning that split my life into 2 parts, everything before the notification and everything after. But before I tell you what I found, I need to tell you who I thought I was, because the distance between those 2 things is where the whole story lives. I grew up in Decatur, Georgia, the only child of Bernard and Celestine Ellison. My father was a high school principal, tall, serious, a man who believed deeply in education and order and doing things the right way. My mother was an elementary school music teacher who sang in the church choir every Sunday and made the best peach cobbler in the county, and told me at least once a week that she was her greatest blessing. We were a close family, not just the 3 of us, the whole extended family. Grandparents, aunts, uncles, cousins who came every Thanksgiving and every 4th of July, and every graduation like it was a reunion they had been waiting for all year. I grew up surrounded by people who looked like me, who called me baby and sweetheart, who told me stories about my grandfather's time in the military and my grandmother's garden and the house my great-great-grandmother had built with her own hands in Alabama. I had a history, a lineage, a story about where I came from that felt as solid and real as the ground under my feet. And all of it, every single piece of it, was built on something my parents decided 34 years ago that I would never know. I want to tell you how the DNA test started because, like most things that change everything, it started with something completely ordinary. My friend Deja, we have been friends since college, had done one of those DNA ancestry kits as a birthday gift to herself. She called me on a Sunday afternoon absolutely beside herself because she had discovered she had a first cousin she had never known about, a whole branch of family that nobody had ever mentioned. She said it was the most extraordinary thing that had ever happened to her. She said I absolutely had to do it. I ordered the kit that same night, not because I expected anything. I had no reason to expect anything. I ordered it the way you do something a friend recommends, with mild curiosity and no particular investment in the outcome. I spat in the tube, mailed it back, and forgot about it for 6 weeks. And then it was Tuesday morning, and I was eating eggs, and the notification came. The first thing I noticed was the ethnicity breakdown. My parents, Bernard and Celestine, were both from families with deep roots in Georgia and Alabama, African American with some Scots-Irish ancestry on my father's side that went back to the plantation era, the way so many African American family trees do. I had grown up hearing about both sides. What the results showed me was completely different. My ancestry was almost entirely West African, Nigerian, and Ghanaian primarily, with a small percentage of British Isles. No Scots-Irish, no Alabama roots, nothing that matched what I had been told my whole life. And then I looked at the DNA matches. The closest match in the database was listed as close family member, likely parent or sibling. Her name in the system was listed as a username I didn't recognize, but beneath the username was a name she had filled out in her profile: Gloria. I didn't know anyone named Gloria. I clicked on her profile. She had filled out almost nothing, just a name, a location, Atlanta, Georgia, and one photograph. I looked at that photograph for a very long time. She looked like me. Not a little, not in a way that could be coincidence or the mind finding patterns where there are none. She looked like me the way a mirror looks like you. The shape of her eyes, the line of her jaw, the way her mouth sat when she wasn't smiling. I closed the app. I put my phone face down on the table, and I sat there in my kitchen in Decatur, Georgia, 34 years old, and understood that my parents had been keeping a secret since before I could form a memory. I did not call them that day. I want you to understand that. I did not pick up the phone and call my mother, who I talked to every single day of my adult life, and ask her what this was, because I knew in the way that you know things you have never been told, that if I called before I understood what I was looking at, I would never get the full truth. I would get the version of the truth they had already decided I was allowed to have. So instead, I did what I do when I need to think clearly. I am a research librarian. I have been a research librarian for 11 years. Finding things that are hidden is literally my profession. I know how to follow a thread. I know how to sit with incomplete information without jumping to conclusions. I know how to build a picture from pieces. I started with what I had: Gloria, Atlanta, the DNA match percentage, which my app was telling me indicated a parent-child relationship with greater than 95% confidence, a single photograph. I opened my laptop and I started searching. It took me 4 days. 4 days of public records, social media, the kinds of databases that a research librarian knows how to navigate and a regular person might not think to look for. 4 days of following threads from one place to the next, a last name attached to the location that appeared in an old community newsletter, a middle name that showed up in a church directory from 2009, a photograph in the background of someone else's Facebook post that I enlarged and compared to the profile picture. During those 4 days, I did not tell my husband what I was looking for. I told him I was working on a research project. He is a patient man who has learned over 11 years of marriage that when I am in research mode, I will surface when I have something to say. He brought me coffee. He didn't ask questions. I thought about telling him many times, but something in me needed to understand what I was holding before I could hand any part of it to someone else. The information felt fragile in a way that is hard to explain. Like if I said it out loud before I knew what it was, it would lose its shape and I wouldn't be able to get it back. I also thought about my parents during those 4 days, about the way my mother sounds on the phone, about my father's voice when he says my name, about the version of them I had carried my whole life, certain, stable, the ground I stood on. I was trying to keep that version intact until I had something real enough to set beside it. On Friday evening, I found her. Gloria Annette Washington, 57 years old. Lived in the Cascade Heights neighborhood of Atlanta, about 20 minutes from the house I grew up in. Worked as an administrator at a private school on the Northwest Side. Had 2 other children, a son named Marcus, 31, a daughter named Renee, 28. I had a brother. I had a sister. I had spent 34 years as an only child, and I had a brother and a sister who had been living 20 minutes away. I found a phone number through a public listing. I wrote it down on a piece of paper with an actual pen because I needed it to feel real, needed the physical act of writing to make it something other than information on a screen. I folded the paper and put it in my wallet, and I went to bed and lay there staring at the ceiling while my husband slept beside me, knowing that whatever I did next was going to change something permanently, and not yet certain I was ready for that. In the morning, I called my parents, not to ask them anything, not yet. I called the way I called every Saturday morning. Hey Mama, hey Daddy, how are you? How's the garden? How's the church choir? I listened to my mother's voice moving through the familiar rhythms of our conversation, and I thought about 34 years of calls exactly like this one. 34 years of a relationship built on something I had never been given the chance to know about. She sounded exactly like herself, warm and certain, and full of small news about people I had known my whole life. The woman who had braided my hair every Sunday morning before church, who had driven me to every piano lesson and every doctor's appointment, and had sat with me through every heartbreak and every ordinary day. And she had been keeping this from me for every single one of those days. I told her I loved her. I hung up. I unfolded the piece of paper from my wallet. I called Gloria Washington on a Saturday afternoon in October. I sat in my car in my own driveway because I needed to be somewhere with an exit. My hands were not entirely steady. I dialed the number and listened to it ring and thought about hanging up, and then thought about a woman who had put her profile on a DNA site and been checking it every month for 3 years, waiting. She answered on the third ring. I said, "Is this Gloria Washington?" She said, "Yes." I said, "My name is Naomi Ellison. I did a DNA ancestry test recently, and the results are showing a very close match to your profile. I think there may be a connection between us that I didn't know about." There was a silence on the other end of the line, long enough that I checked to make sure the call was still connected. And then Gloria Washington said, very quietly, "I know who you are." I gripped the steering wheel with my free hand. I said, "You do?" She said, "I have been waiting for this call for 34 years. I don't have the exact right words for what happened to me in that moment. I have thought about it many times since and tried to find the language for it, and I still don't quite have it. It was not relief. It was not devastation. It was something that sat between those two things, like a door swinging open onto a room you didn't know your house contained, and not yet knowing whether what's inside is something you needed or something that was going to cost you more than you expected. We talked for 2 hours that first call. She told me what she could in 2 hours, which was not everything, but was enough to understand the shape of it. She had been 19 years old, first year at Spelman College, away from home for the first time in her life. She had gotten pregnant, and the father, a boy from Morehouse, had disappeared when he found out. Her own parents were strict, deeply religious people, and the conversation about what to do had been, she said, very short. They had found an adoption agency, they had found a family. The paperwork had been handled quickly. She had not wanted to give me up. She said that directly, without any softening. She said, "I did not want to give you up. I need you to know that before anything else." But she had been 19 and alone, and her parents had found what they described as a stable, loving family, a family that wanted a child desperately and would give her everything, and she had signed the papers. She said she had held me for 4 hours before she signed them, and that she had thought about those 4 hours almost every single day for 34 years. I sat in my car with the windows fogging slightly, and I listened to all of this. She told me about her 2 searches. When I was 12, she had tried to find me through the agency and hit the wall of a closed adoption, record sealed, no pathway through, doors closed in every direction. When I was 25, she had tried again with the help of an adoption search specialist and gotten the same result. She had put her profile on the DNA Ancestry site 3 years ago on the advice of an online support group for birth mothers, and she had been checking it every few months since. She said, "When I got the notification that a close match had appeared, I opened it immediately. I saw your photograph." A pause. "You look exactly like my mother." I had a grandmother I had never met who I apparently looked exactly like. I told my parents the following Sunday. I drove to Decatur, the same route I had driven hundreds of times, past the same landmarks, the same turns, and I sat down at the kitchen table where I had eaten breakfast every morning of my childhood. I put my phone on the table between us, with the DNA results open on the screen. My mother looked at the phone, and I watched something move across her face that I had never seen there before. Not guilt, exactly, something older and heavier and more complicated than guilt, something that had been waiting a very long time to finally be seen. My father said, "Naomi." I said, "I need you to tell me everything, not the version you think I can handle, everything." They told me everything. 6 years of marriage before they found out my mother could not carry a pregnancy to term, 3 miscarriages in 4 years, the kind of grief that doesn't announce itself loudly but settles into the walls of a marriage and changes the texture of every room. They had pursued adoption through a private agency. They had been matched with a young woman at Spelman, 19, alone, no support from the father. My mother said, "We were told the birth mother wanted a closed adoption, that she wanted to move forward with her life and contact would not be appropriate." I said, "Is that what she told them, or is that what you were told?" My mother looked at her hands. She said, "We were told. I don't know exactly what she said to them." I thought about Gloria on the phone, about 4 hours before signing papers she didn't want to sign, about searching for me twice and hitting walls both times, about 3 years of checking a database and waiting. I didn't say what I was thinking, not then. Some things need space before they can be spoken. My father said, "We should have told you. We talked about it many times, and we kept deciding the right time hadn't come yet. And then years passed, and it felt like opening something that had been sealed too long would only hurt you." I looked at this man who had walked beside me for 34 years, who had done everything he believed a good father did. I said, "It hurt me anyway, Daddy. It just hurt me without my consent." He didn't say anything. My mother was crying quietly. I stayed 2 more hours. We talked and we sat in silence, and we found our way slowly around the edges of something that was going to take a long time to fully understand. My mother said at one point, "We were so afraid of losing you." And I understood what she meant. That the fear of telling me had been for them the fear that the truth would take them away from me, that I would choose something else over what we had. What I wanted to say and didn't quite say that day was that the secret had already created a distance. That for 34 years I had been making sense of myself using incomplete information, like trying to navigate with a map that has whole regions left blank. That I had spent my entire life not knowing why I sometimes felt like there was something about myself I couldn't quite locate. I had always attributed that feeling to something internal, some restlessness, some dissatisfaction I couldn't name. Now I understood what it had actually been. It had been a question without a question, looking for an answer I didn't know I needed. I stayed 2 more hours. Before I left, my mother held me at the door the way she had held me my whole life, both arms, long, like she was trying to memorize it. She said, "You are my daughter. Whatever else is true, that is true." I said, "I know, Mama. I know." I met Gloria for coffee 3 weeks later, a cafe in Midtown, neutral ground, somewhere neither of us had history. I got there early and sat facing the door, and when she walked in, I felt something moved through me that I still don't entirely have a word for. She is not a tall woman. She carries herself carefully, precisely, like someone who has learned exactly how much space they are allowed to take up. She sat down across from me and we looked at each other for a moment without saying anything. And then she smiled, and I saw my own smile on another person's face for the first time in my life. We talked for 4 hours. She told me about her life, and I told her about mine, about Marcus, who is quiet and builds furniture with his hands, and shook mine with careful formality the first time we met, about Renee, who cried and said she had always wanted an older sister, with a directness that left me speechless for a moment, about Etta, my grandmother, who is 79 and lives in a house in Savannah she has occupied for 50 years, and who Gloria said had been asking about me for years. Gloria said, "She wants to meet you, whenever you're ready. There is no pressure and no timeline." I thought about a woman in Savannah who was 79 years old, who had been asking about me for years, who I apparently looked exactly like. I said, "I think I'd like that. Soon." It has been 8 months since that Tuesday morning. 8 months of conversations and coffee and the slow, careful work of figuring out who everyone is to each other and how you hold new things without dropping what you already had. I met Etta on a Saturday in December. I drove to Savannah with my husband. Gloria met us there. We walked up to the house, a brick house on a quiet street lined with old trees, and Gloria knocked, and the door opened, and a small woman with silver hair and my grandmother's eyes looked at me across the threshold. She said, "There you are." Like I had simply been somewhere else for a while, like I had always been expected, like 34 years was just the time it had taken me to find my way to her door. We sat in her living room for 3 hours. Her house is full of photographs, on the walls, on the tables, on the top of the piano that nobody plays anymore, but that nobody has moved either. She showed me photographs of her own mother and grandmother, women I descend from who I had never known existed. She showed me a photograph of Gloria at 19 years old, the year I was born, standing in front of her dormitory at Spelman. And then she went to a drawer in the side table next to her chair, and she took out an envelope. She held it for a moment before she handed it to me. She said, "Gloria wrote this when you were 2 weeks old. She didn't know where you were or if you'd ever find your way to us, but she wanted there to be something waiting for you if you did." I held the envelope for a long time before I opened it. Inside was a single page, handwritten, the ink slightly faded with age. I am not going to tell you what it said. Some things belong only to the people they were written for. But I will tell you that I read it sitting in my grandmother's living room in Savannah, with Gloria beside me, and my husband across the room, And when I finished reading it, I sat quietly for a moment, and then I looked up at Gloria and I said, "Thank you for keeping this." She said, "I kept it for 34 years. I was always going to give it to you." I am still figuring out what all of this means. I don't think I will finish figuring it out for a very long time, maybe ever. There are days when it feels like abundance, like I have been given more family than I knew to ask for. There are days when it feels like grief, for the years that passed and the things nobody told me, and the grandmother I almost never met. My parents and I are different now. Not broken, I want to be clear about that, but different, the way anything is different once you know something you didn't know before. We are learning to be more honest with each other than we were, and that is harder and more necessary than I expected. And Gloria and Marcus and Renee and Etta are becoming something I don't have a word for yet. Not a replacement, not a parallel, something new that didn't have a name before it existed. People ask me which family is my real family. I understand why they ask. It seems like the question that has to be answered before anything makes sense. But I don't answer it that way anymore, because I think real is the wrong word for what we're trying to measure. Bernard and Celestine raised me. They loved me through every ordinary day and every hard one. That is real. Gloria held me for 4 hours and spent 34 years waiting and smiled at me across a coffee table with my own smile. That is also real. And Etta said, "There you are," like I had only ever been temporarily elsewhere. All of it is real. I am not going to choose. I want to say something to anyone listening who is carrying a secret about someone they love, who made a decision years ago that felt necessary and protective and has been living inside it ever since. I am not here to judge that decision. I don't know what it cost, or what it felt like to make it, or what it has been to carry it. But hear this: the people you are protecting with silence are not protected. They are only living without information they have the right to have about their own lives, and the truth has a way of arriving regardless, through a notification on an ordinary Tuesday, through a DNA kit, through the shape of a stranger's face in a database photograph. It arrives, and when it does, it is better if it doesn't arrive alone. If this story moved you, if it found you at the right moment, share it with someone who needs to hear it today. Subscribe to Zuri Chronicles, because every week we come back and tell another story, another truth, another life that turned out to be more than anyone knew. My name is Zuri, and I'll see you next time.